Okay, let's get started. Welcome from wherever you are in the world to my presentation, Walking in Another's Shoes, Middle School Math Projects that Playfully Explore Social Justice. My name is Liz Caffrey, and I am a teacher in Watertown, Massachusetts at a school called the Atrium School in the United States. I want to alleviate any anxiety about the slides or resources and links that I mentioned through my talk. And I'll put a link in the chat to a resources document that contains a link to my slides, a link to the project that I'll be presenting, as well as a link to a list of a bunch of resources that I personally find really useful in my teaching. So that will be popping up momentarily. So my goals for this session are 1, that you'll understand the context for playful learning in middle school math. 2, that you'll learn about a specific example of a project that explores play to change the world. And 3, that you'll leave with ideas and resources for adding playful elements to your class that advance equity in your classroom and social justice in the wider world. First, I want to just talk about where I'm coming from, my perspective, which is also my bias. I teach in the US. I teach middle school, which is 11 to 14-year-olds. I have very small classes. I'm very fortunate. My classes range from 10 students to 17 students. I hope that what I've experienced and designed with my students will in some way be useful for you. Also, I'll be talking a lot about race in my talk, and I'll be using the term people of color to denote underrepresented ethnicities, as that is the phrase most commonly used in the US. That said, I know there are other hidden biases embedded in this talk. I don't know what they are, but I absolutely welcome feedback if you notice them. So this is a moment for you to reflect and think. What does play look like in middle schoolers, in 11 to 14-year-olds? So take a moment and think of maybe 3 things that play might look like for that age group. It can be in school, it can be out of school, both. So I sort of had I know what I think play looks like, but I asked my students what it looks like. And this is what they said. This is a word cloud of all of their answers. So this is outside of school. You can see their most popular responses are games, and specifically video games, as well as sports. Some also mentioned acting, making things, and even daydreaming. And I asked them who they play with as well. The most popular response was friends, followed by family, themselves, playing alone, and people they've never met online or in sports games. Then I asked them what it looks like, what play looks like for them in school. How do they learn playfully? You can see their top responses: projects and hands-on interactive creative activities. Some things overlap with what they do outside of school, like games and acting. Though they use different words to describe it, it's not in the word cloud, there was also a theme of playing with ideas rather than physical objects, as well as trying on another persona, identity, or profession. Play with a purpose was another common theme, as well as being invested in the outcome of what you're doing. Collaboration was a key element in playful learning in class. But how does this translate to play to change the world? At all ages, play allows us to try things out. And middle schoolers are at a ripe time for more sophisticated play, playful learning that goes beyond themselves, extending to and even helping the larger world. As they enter adolescence, students start to see more complexity in themselves and the world around them. They're at such an interesting age, on the precipice of adulthood, but still young enough to be very curious and open-minded. They are developing a powerful sense of fairness and justice. They are developing a non-binary worldview, so not necessarily good versus bad, happy versus sad. There's complexity in emotions, there's complexity in people. And lastly, adolescence is basically an identity crisis. Who am I? Who am I not? What are my values? Middle schoolers are looking for answers and inspiration from the peers and adults in their life, but they're also at an age of pushing away the other and defining themselves in opposition to. And that's why there can be so much bullying at this age. It's also why actively teaching empathy is crucial in middle school. But how do we do this? And how do we do this in a math class? I believe that as math teachers, we can teach about empathy by humanizing mathematics. Who are the people behind the ideas? How do they come to create or discover new math? How can we learn from their struggles and successes? We can teach about equity by ensuring that all of our students have access and challenge in math every day. And we can teach about social justice by studying the people that made the math we use today. By social justice, I mean recognizing and acting upon the power that we have for making social change, positive social change. We can also teach about social justice through critical examination of data and the narrative it creates, empowering our students to unpack and question the math they see in their classrooms, the media, and the wider world. What story does the data tell, and who tells that story? What do they want you to believe, and whose story is missing? Believe it or not, it is possible to teach these challenging topics through play. I also believe that if we do not teach about social justice in math, we are doing our students an incredible disservice. For what we do not teach them says just as much about what we value as what we actually teach them. If we do not explicitly call out injustices, we leave those as blanks for the students to fill in themselves. And this is exactly what I was left to do as a student. I'm going to tell you a little story. So my earliest memory of encountering difference happened in first grade. Can you spot me? I'm the one in the purple dress, sitting down towards the right. What do you notice about the kids in my class? Growing up in a very white suburb of Boston, race was not talked about. When I referred to Charlie, the one student in my class who was clearly not white, as Black, my teacher responded in a horrified voice. Charlie is not Black. There was no follow-up to her comment, no correction. And to this day, I do not know anything about Charlie's heritage. I got two messages from my teacher's outrage. First, shame on you. Do not talk about that. And also, there's something wrong with being Black. The experience affected me throughout my life. I felt shame in talking about race for years. And when I started teaching math, I tried to avoid issues of conflict. I taught math as a neutral subject, a field of uncontroversial ideas. But then 9/11 happened in my second year of teaching, and I had to face my students that morning. I had no idea how to talk to them about that, but I knew I had to try. Looking back at my first grade experience, I'm saddened by the opportunity my teacher missed. I don't want to be guilty of saying nothing, nor do I want my students to feel ashamed to talk about difficult and personal topics. I had to work to overcome my shame and discomfort in order to better serve my students. And I've been guided by this knowledge. The way that we talk with our students about race will have a profound impact on them. And not just race, of course. The way that we talk with our students about all aspects of identity will have a profound impact on them. We need to think carefully about these conversations and create experiences for them to positively connect to their own identity and that of others. It's hard, ongoing work. And how does it fit with math teaching? I will tell you one more story, then we'll get to the projects. My earliest memory of loving math was from visiting the Mathematica exhibit at the Boston Museum of Science. It was designed by Charles and Ray Eames, a husband and wife team of math-loving artists. This exhibit is opened in 1961 and is on display in the Boston Museum of Science to this day. I love taking my own students there. They will sit captivated at the metal balls mimicking planetary motion, or the train car that travels on a Mobius strip, or the outlines of 3D polyhedra that dip into bubble solution to form fascinating planar intersections, much as I did about 30 years ago. There's a cuckoo clock going off above my desk here. Very playful, but a little distracting. I think it's going to go off 9 times because it's 9 o'clock here. Oh no, 10 times. There we go. Where was I? Now relegated to the basement of the museum, the exhibit shows some signs of age. It's much less interactive than most museum exhibits today. There are a few buttons to push, but mostly you're just watching things happen. And if we take a look at the wall of math history, What do you notice about the mathematicians you see? Maybe you need a closer look. They are all white men. There's one white Jewish woman, Emmy Noether, and there's one person of color after 1700, Srinivasa Ramanujan. And here is their they have like a section next to the timeline that has a disclaimer, like an updated thing. Charles and Ray Eames created the Mathematica exhibit along with this timeline in 1961. Since that time, mathematics has continued to attract individuals of great originality. To the right are some of the mathematicians active through the 20th century. There's 157 people on the wall, and I just want you to think in your head how many you think might be women. So there are there's 51 women, which is about 32% of the wall, and there are no non-binary folks at all. How about people of color? How many do you think are on the wall out of the 157? So I looked up these people just to see where they were from and their ethnicity. There are 15 people of color on the wall, which is less than 10% of the wall. There's one Hispanic person on the wall and no South Asian people at all, and no Native Americans. So a lot of cultural diversity is lacking in the update. This exhibit analysis is one isolated example, but sadly not an unusual one. We have got to do better, both in access to mathematics and in representation of those in the field. In my attempt to explore a more diverse collection of mathematicians, I've been inspired by the career path of John Urschel. He was a former pro football player who quit the NFL in order to pursue his PhD in graph theory at MIT. And when asked about being a Black mathematician, he said, if you look up the most famous Black mathematicians in history, the majority of them are famous just for being Black. These words should serve as a mandate. We need to move beyond a place where the voices of the underrepresented are so one-dimensional. We need to be better at seeing each individual's contribution to math, as well as appreciating what it took for them to succeed in the field. So I mentioned earlier that I have a list of books that I found really helpful in my work, that especially around diversity, but this book served as a real inspiration and guide to me when I first started having conversations about identity in the math classroom. Although he's talking about an English class, it's very relevant to any subject. So Matthew Kay offers this inspiring quote in his introduction. It's hard for a student to unlearn empathy, to forget discernment, to dismiss the importance of solid evidence once they've grown used to demanding it. The next generation of teachers, entertainers, lawyers, and politicians needs to be far better at this stuff than we have been. They have been coming of age in a world of artfully disguised injustices, most of which will stay visible, invisible, and vicious if people never learn how to meaningfully discuss them. If you name it, you can combat it. So now I'd like to pause and have you do a little bit of reflection for yourself. I've given you kind of a lot to think about. How would you use what you've seen as a call to action with your own students? And just what ideas do you have in terms of how you might use what you've seen? And maybe if you can't think of that yet, what do you think will be challenging about doing this work? So there's a bit of a lag in the Q&A from when I can see it. So I'll give a moment for folks to put in some things so we can see what everybody says. I agree, it is hard to answer. I'll show you how I answered it next, but as a teacher, I always want to know what what my students think before I give them the lesson. So here's your chance. Another part too is, how do we do this playfully, right? How do we avoid it being just sort of this heavy, depressing weight on our students? How can we empower them to feel like they can make a change, or that they can do better? They can be part of the doing better. We'll give about 30 more seconds and then I'll move on. So in my 6th through 8th grade math classes, I have several playful projects, as well as a weekly routine, math news, that address different social justice issues. And I'm going to share just one with you today, and we're going to go deep into it so that you really get a chance to see how it plays out. So in the Mathematician research project, students explore 2 essential questions. How did humans contribute to math over time and across different cultures? And how did power and privilege affect different people's ability to study math? In this project, students not only research a mathematician, they embody their character, imagining themselves in that person's shoes. The project is a way to playfully explore identity while considering math as a human endeavor. It fosters a rich and individualized exploration of mathematics. Each student gets something different out of the project, and even people who research the same mathematician from year to year get something completely different out of researching them. And they also enhance one another's experience as they share their discoveries and make connections with other mathematicians in the class. This project falls in the middle of middle school, so for us that's 7th grade, just as students are beginning to grapple with more abstract algebraic ideas and gain a sense of math beyond computation. So as I said before, in the resources document that was linked at the beginning, there is a link to the actual project that students see, which has a checklist and a rubric and deadlines and things like that in it. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview. So students are assigned a mathematician. They actually choose a mathematician, and then sometimes there's conflict. Some people want the same one. The list of mathematicians I use is also in the resources document, and it's evolving all the time. So I showed you this year's list. First, they research their mathematician. I get books out of the local library for them, and but they have to pick at least one additional source, either from our classroom library, which has lots of books on mathematicians, or through the internet. And then, as I said before, a lot of my favorite books are linked in that resources document at the bottom. This phase, the research phase, takes about 3 to 5 hours. Students write one fact on an index card, keeping track of their sources as they go. And then at this stage, what's really cool is I often see students playing with their character because their notes are in the first person. So instead of saying Sophie Germain discovered a set of prime numbers, they'll write, I discovered a new set of prime numbers. So they're really like picturing themselves as their mathematician. And there's a great pride in that for them. The next phase is making the math visible. Students create an artifact that helps us understand their person's math. The students meet with me to discuss the math. I break it down into kid-friendly language, or I give them a resource that can do that. In some cases, if the mathematician's still alive, the kids have emailed them and the mathematician themselves describes the math, which is the best possible scenario. So here students are playing at being mathematicians as they encounter new and challenging concepts they've never seen before. They then brainstorm ideas for the artifact, select one, and create it both in class and at home. Some examples of artifacts are a visual example of how Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi used the method of completing the square to solve a quadratic equation, a computer program to illustrate the concept of recursion pioneered by Polish mathematician Rosa Peter, and a cardboard replica of the wooden clock engineered by American mathematician Benjamin Banneker. Next, develop your character. That's MC Escher, if you couldn't figure it out. This student really got into embodying him. Through performing arts exercises and theater games, students consider how their mathematicians spoke and carried themselves, literally how they walk through life. This is the phase where students truly walk in another's shoes. They transform into their mathematician. Step 4, write and perform a script. In a group of 2 to 5 students, they write a script that connects their mathematicians in time and space. The script should illustrate the connections between the mathematicians and communicate the most important things about each mathematician. Students rehearse the script and perform it for the class, dressed in character as their mathematician. In what type of scene would these mathematicians be meeting through time and space? We've had a time machine yacht piloted by Stephen Hawking, a game show hosted by Pythagoras, a talk show, and as I will show you in a moment, an escape room. Step 5, connect and reflect. We have a mathematician mingle right after the performances where students enjoy a party together in character as their mathematician. The goal is to learn even more about other mathematicians, especially how they connect to the person they researched. We do mathematician trivia to see how much they learned. Students complete an individual reflection where they are asked to articulate what they got out of the project, as well as how successfully they and their peers participated in the skit writing portion. Finally, we have a silent debate in the form of a chalk talk. Usually it's on a board in my classroom, but I shared with you the version that happened the year that we were all remote. So it happened using a Google Jamboard. The question is, was math created or discovered? So you can see some of the comments that they're making are about whether the language is the math or the thing that the language describes is the math. So they're really kind of teasing apart the idea of like what actually is mathematics, which is a really cool debate to be having. And I always encourage my students to think about what their mathematician would have said, not only just what they would have said. Now we're going to look at some examples of student work, both a snippet of a skit and some excerpts from students' reflections about what they learned from doing the project. So I am in fear that the tech won't work. So if you want to scan the QR code just in case the video doesn't play, you will be safe to watch it on your own. But I'll just give you, I'm setting the scene for you. So the scene that you'll be seeing is entitled Women Kicking Butt. There are 5 female mathematicians who are stuck in an escape room. They do not yet realize that the 5 puzzles they must solve all have to do with math they individually worked on. You will hear them commiserating about their parents, as well as discussing the obstacles they each needed to overcome in order to study math. Before we watch, I also want to mention that our school does not have an official theater classroom or high-tech recording equipment. So I ask that the quality of the filming not be a distraction. Rather, please focus on the students and the connections that they found to one another, as well as the thought they put into creating the scene itself. And just so you know, the mathematicians from left to right are Emmy Noether, Sophie Germain, Maria Agnesi, Sophia Kovalevsky, and Ada Lovelace. Okay, so let's see if this works.
Come on, ladies. We are women in math. We've all faced hardships before. We've been through way worse than an escape room with a couple of math problems. We have to work together.
Oh, sorry.
I was forced into a loveless marriage just to get ahead.
My dreams of becoming a nun and helping the poor were taken away from me.
I was not accepted into school. I had to go to school under a man's name. And I was told advanced math was too hard for a frail woman's body.
So what are we going to do about it?
We can solve some silly math problems. We are mathematicians after all.
Yeah!
Hey, wait. Is that my sand table? That's a picture we were looking at. I recognize those curves everywhere. Look, see, when I turn the frequency to 345, the table vibrates and the sands move in that position. That pattern happens every time. I researched them.
Look, one of the blocks unlocked. Wait, there are 5 blocks and 5 steps. Maybe each of us has a problem related to our math that we need to solve, unlock all of them.
I think this is mine.
So now, next slide, please. There we go. Next, we're going to hear 5 short reflections from students. Some of them are reflecting on the question, how did power and privilege affect your mathematician's ability to pursue their career? Others are responding to the prompt, what did you personally learn from doing this project? So here we go.
This project helped show me how many common strategies and types of math that we use today had to be invented, discovered, or publicized before anyone really started to use them.
Fibonacci was a privileged white male who was rich. His father was a merchant, and he went along on voyages. He learned about Hindu-Arabic numerals while on the trip to Persia. After this project, I now know that all great math is built on the math of others.
Katherine Johnson was a Black woman, and she struggled with discrimination. Because she was a woman, she was told she wasn't as smart and couldn't do things. This made it hard for her to continue her mathematician career, but it didn't stop her.
Through this project, I got more interested in not only math and physics, but general relativity. I also learned that no one really has an excuse for not doing their work after all that Stephen did.
I love that one. And this student did not want to be recorded, but I loved their reflection. This project helped me understand how things like statistics combined with a watchful eye can be used to genuinely improve the lives of others. So now I'll share a little bit about what I've learned. I've been doing this project for about 15 years at this point, but it's evolved and changed considerably. Many of these changes are due to helpful feedback from students or fellow teachers, and some of them are based on my own reflections after doing deeper identity and diversity work. In recent years, I've made two major improvements. First, students get to choose their mathematicians. I used to assign them based on what I knew about students' identities and personal interests, but now I allow students to choose widely from a list that is inclusive and sensitive to many different aspects of identity. I give them like a short elevator pitch on about 30 different mathematicians, and they kind of vote for their top 5. The list is ever evolving, as I mentioned before. You'll see the list I use this year in the resources document, along with 2 much longer lists if you wish to teach about a really diverse set of mathematicians that I've gotten from other sources. The second way I've evolved the project is by making it an interdisciplinary project with performing arts. Previously, students wrote a monologue that they delivered to the class and their parents, or they created a story about their person using the medium of their choice. The performing arts element of script writing really asks students to synthesize and apply what they know, as well as make connections between mathematicians in a way that the other prompts really didn't. Many of the skits are hilarious, and I really feel like when students can use humor appropriately, it shows their deep insight and understanding. Something I consider every year is how to address the issue of appropriation, students taking on the persona of someone who does not match their race, culture, or gender. The performing arts teacher and I both talk with the students about how to respectfully honor their mathematician. We talk about how it's not appropriate to do accents or mimic physical disabilities, and what type of dress would be respectful. These conversations are important, again, because they make the work on identity explicit and proactive. Students take so much pride in embodying their mathematician. They want to do right by them, and my job is just to help them make the right choices. So in conclusion, let me go back to what I said earlier. The way that we talk with our students about all aspects of identity will have a profound impact on them. I want my students to see math as a dynamic, creative discipline, one they belong to, not one just reserved for old white men like the wall in the museum. What kind of mathematicians do I want on the wall for my students? These mathematicians grace the walls of my classroom. This poster is from Jessica Wolf, a math graduate student and an artist. I love the inspiring quotes. I love that you see a bit about each person's math and heritage. I love the diversity of cultures and fields of math. But even this updated wall felt too static when I put it up. I want a wall that feels unfinished, full of the dynamism of math history, which is why I added this little thing in. Because who's next? And because at the end of the day, I want my students to see themselves in that spot, as capable of sitting among the greats, as true mathematicians and change makers. And they do. I know because I asked them. How will you change the world? I will change the world by just being myself and being kind, because everything ripples. I will always be a good person to others, the environment, and myself, and help people in need. Even if you can't make a difference in the world, I believe that everyone can make a difference to other people, just random people or friends or family, which might not be enough to change the world, but you can change their world. I want to change the world by learning math and spreading knowledge. I want to write stories that embrace diversity and play with fantasy, humor, and maybe even some deep topics. I think I could change the world by adding something more beautiful to the world. And lastly, I believe I can fly, metaphorically. So I hope, going back to the 3 ways that playful learning can change the world in math and in middle school, I hope you can see how this project humanizes math, tapping into adolescents' identity development and allowing them to appreciate the complexity of their own identity and that of others in the world around them. I hope you can see how the Mathematician project provides equitable opportunities to learn rich math, offering individualized entry points for students and the opportunity to make cross-cultural connections. I hope you see through this project how math can be more than just a field of universal ideas, how it can connect to social justice, offering students a powerful tool to examine systems of power and oppression in our world. And finally, I hope you see how doing this difficult work playfully through imagination and play acting allows students to take risks and connect empathically with others in ways they might not otherwise be able to. So I would love to hear, again, in the Q&A in the chat, what stood out to you from this project. So anything that stood out, as well as any questions you have. And I have about 2 minutes before I have to sign off. The project lasts, we have this thing called project weeks. And so for 2 weeks, all afternoon, or for an hour and a half each day, the students are working on this project. That's how long it lasts. So it obviously depends on how long your periods are and things like that. And again, if you go in the resources document, you can see all of the deadlines. But yeah, they're working on it for an hour and a half every day. I'm going to just wrap up. Let me go back over here and just, first of all, I just need to insert a shameless plug because I run a summer institute in Boston. So if you happen to be in Boston from July 18th through 20 and want to join us, you should come play with us because we're going to be having a 3-day in-person institute for preschool through 8th grade math teachers. And the theme is the building blocks of math, constructing knowledge through hands-on experiences. There'll be lots of playful learning happening. And please don't hesitate to reach out via Twitter or email. And again, the link to the resources document is there, which has a lot of extra things that I sort of alluded to in this presentation. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.